We have Mr. Al-Sharoki coming up to give us an overview about the North Carolina school closure statutory procedures. That's a mouthful. Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. As you just had a mouthful of a title, I am here per your request, and I'd like to give a little context as the presentation is being pulled up to walk you through the statutory requirements for school closure in the state of North Carolina. The statutory requirements means it's law. So tonight's presentation, I'm going to do a lot of reading to you because laws are not very subjective. There are a lot of shells in the language for such a short law, but I want to make sure that we walk through them in chunks so that you just understand the process, which it's not a difficult process, but it is one that is very sequential in nature. But to give you some context, obviously we have been talking about going back to where the Board of County Commissioners consulted for Orange County Schools and us, someone to look at our facilities. It was not just a facility assessment, it was also an optimization plan where they looked at our enrollment, they looked at our space utilization in both school district schools. And the one thing that came out, and we've heard all the way through this past December from Dr. Dollar, is that when you look at enrollment and you look at the amount of seats that we have in our elementary, middle, and high schools are fairly good right now. They are, middle schools, we know that there may be room in the future, but right now they're pretty snug. Our high schools are very snug right now. They're at over 100% capacity. Each year you've seen as we've had transfer windows where you as a board determine which schools are open or closed for transfers. The high schools have always been ones, for the majority, have always been closed. So with that being said, Wolpert told us that we had, at that point, 1,000 seats available at the elementary level. 1,000 seats is equal to about 2 schools. If our schools are on average about 500 student schools, give or take the programs that may be at those schools. Obviously, Dr. Dollar, through Carolina Demography here at UNC, was hired by the county to also conduct the continued work, knowing that the county is responsible for the funding of renovation and replacements of all schools. It's not you as a board's responsibility, it is the Board of County Commissioners, and that is part of the statutory law as well, just not the one that I'm talking about tonight. So Dr. Dollar came and started looking at projections and went beyond what the Wolpert group presented to the Board of County Commissioners about 2 years ago and said that right now we're trending at just over 1,300 available seats and that trend could continue to go down for the foreseeable future. So with all of that, in your board retreat, as you received that information, which was the most updated information for ourselves in the county, also was aware of that, be it that he's being hired through them. You guys asked for guidance for if we were to consider school closure, what would the next steps be? What are the statutory requirements that all boards in the state of North Carolina are required to follow? So with that being said, I'm just going to start through, and I am not going to read this to you, but this is the statute it's 11.5C-72, which is consolidation of districts and discontinuance of schools, the statute. We're going to focus on the statute that you can barely see, but it's the gray area. At the bottom, there is a section 2 and a letter B. Those sections we're really not going to talk about tonight, but I will tell you what they are. Section 2 basically says that the provisions of that law is not to deprive any local board of education the authority to assign or enroll any pupils in schools in accordance with other statutes. So this law does not talk about what you would do if you had to change boundaries and do redistricting. There are separate statutes for that. And it also indicates in letter B that this section does not govern the merger of a city school administrative unit with another school administrative unit. And I'll use an example of when Alamance County merged with Burlington City Schools and became Alamance Burlington Schools. This statute does not govern that, and there are other statutes for that. So those are the disclaimers. So we're going to focus on the practice that you would need to follow. So in the first section, and this is the part where I start reading to you. What did I just do? Well, there we go. It states that local boards of education shall have the power and authority to close or consolidate schools, and I underline close, within the same school district with the approval of the State Board of Education to consolidate school districts or other school areas over which the board has full control, whenever and wherever, in its judgment, the closing or consolidation, again, we're talking about closing, will better serve the educational interest of the local school administrative unit or any part of it. The reason I'm talking about closing and not consolidation is generally consolidation is when you're in a district where you may have 2 high schools and you're going to consolidate into 1 high school. So you're taking your 2 units and you're consolidating into 1. That is not the case for us. And the case for us is we have 11 elementary schools, and realistically, from a mathematical standpoint, with capacity and membership, we could drop to 9. The Board of Education, first thing that they require you to do is that you conduct a thorough study of the school to be closed that addresses the welfare of the students to be affected by the proposed closing. And there are 4 things that they stipulate that it should include in the study. 1, the study has to evaluate the geographic conditions, the anticipate increase or decrease in school enrollment. You have to talk about the inconvenience of the hardship that might result to the pupils who are affected by such a closing. So you just have to talk about if there's a transportation hardship, if there are longstanding community things that are part of it, if there are programs that could be negatively impacted that you're not taking into consideration. You just have to evaluate everything that could cause a hardship to the best of your ability. You also have to provide the cost of providing additional school facilities in the event that such closing occurs. So in this case, if we were to close schools, we would talk about the fact that we are consolidating our schools. We're making them more efficient, but in the net result is we're also replacing schools that have aged and have served their life. But it's not a direct result of the redistrict that would occur. So we would mention it, but it wouldn't be such as if you were consolidating and you were going to close 2 high schools, but build 1 brand new high school for the 2 older schools to consolidate into. That's really not the case here because all of our schools will ultimately have to be impacted because they are imbalanced for the most part when it comes to student enrollment or capacity. And then it includes other factors as the board shall consider germane. And we talked about this at the board retreat where I suggested that one of the biggest drivers that should be taken into consideration is the age and condition of the facility, knowing that our county, and we could talk a lot about that, but where our county has really made that paramount in the decision making based upon their guidance and what they have approved. But at the same time, there's other factors that you should look at. And, I will throw some out there such as adjacency to other schools, walkability, connectivity to community trails, bikeways, programs that are at the schools. Is pre-K at the school? What did the demographics look like at the school? If you were to move or relocate students, how might that impact the makeup of schools, the academic performance of schools? These are things that you as a board have the ability to use under consideration. It doesn't say that you have to provide a certain amount of weight for any of this, but for the ones that are bulleted, you at least minimum, you have to be able to demonstrate that you have done, to the best of your ability, you've covered those. And before the entry of the closing, the next step would be that you have to have one public hearing. It doesn't say one, it just says you have to have a public hearing. And it has to be specifically in regard to a proposed closing. And that's where the public is afforded an opportunity to express their views. I'm going to go a little further about what we would recommend and what are best practices, but the law states that you have to have one public hearing. And upon the basis of the study, and after you have had such a hearing, you as a board may exercise its discretion to approve the closing of the school. So that's really what it takes: a study, a public hearing, and a vote. That's the 3 primary pieces that have to be done. But as you will hear a little later, I think there's a little more that we need to do given the complexity and the fact that this is not simple as closing 2 schools and just moving 2 populations possibly into 1. We're impacting ultimately the entire elementary population within our district to balance and right size all of our schools from an efficiency standpoint. So I want to walk through some guidance that came from board counsel through Tharrington and Smith just to kind of give a little more direction as we go through these steps. The first step is initiating a proposal for a closure. And this is where you determine which school or schools should be considered for closure or consolidation. This discussion would result in a vote to direct that a study be conducted of the possible closure, or here called consolidation, of 1 or more specific school facilities. So ultimately, there's a point where you're going to have to give staff, the superintendent and its staff, direction to conduct a study of schools to consider or specific schools to consider so that staff can bring back information, possibly give you a recommendation, but allow you just to reflect and weigh and decide if you believe in that recommendation or if you believe other things should be taken into consideration at that point. In conducting a study of the closure, the statute directs that you conduct a study based upon the welfare of the students that are affected. Again, you want to make sure that you address anything that may be harmful or cause hardship for students. The statute says that the study should evaluate factors that are identified by the board, as well as the 4 bulleted items, the statutory factors. You can build a timeline for an opportunity for staff to present that draft study. So you could say, as an example, Mr. Shiroki, I'd like for you, working with the superintendent, to come back in the next 2 or 3 board meetings or the next board meeting to be able to do. But obviously, when they say establish a timeline, it would be for us to come back to you. But there's also a timeline of what I would recommend is getting out there and letting the public know, if you were looking to close a school, what's the earliest that you might do that? So that everybody understands, are we talking about next year? Are we talking about 2 years? Are we talking about 3? Is it a multi-year approach to kind of give people an idea of that timeline, not just giving us staff a timeline to present a draft? I have examples in the abstract that were provided from council. One is a very detailed analysis study that was done, and the other one is a little more simplistic and gets right to the point. I think for us, knowing that we've had a consultant already look at the age and condition of our facilities, and our commissioners have already given us direction that they want schools replaced, not renovated, as we take our oldest buildings, that we really don't have to go through the detailed study that is the first example, because they're going through the full building analysis, and that work has already been done. So for us, it's really about all of the factors that come into play and weighing that information to make some recommendations, and for you ultimately, if you choose, to make a decision. In providing the public hearing, again, this is just giving you some specifics, but what it does say is that the statute does not explicitly require that the study be completed before the public hearing, but the council recommends that it's helpful to have the study information available to the public, and we would recommend that. If you ask us to go back and to provide information or come back and give a presentation where we believe is a starting point, let us provide that, and then ultimately if you say, we'd like for you to do this option or this option, then at that point we would develop a narrative that would be part of that study, that would be part of a proposal that we would officially bring to you at that point. So we would say you do the study before you actually consider a vote, and consider public hearings where you have listening sessions within communities that may be impacted, so that they can weigh in, give feedback, give any information they believe is relevant or germane for you to consider, so that when our proposal would ultimately, if it came to you, you have the community's input at the same time to be able to weigh as you deliberate on the best course of action. The final thing is entering a decision on the proposal, and this is fairly simplistic, is that the school board is given the wide discretion to determine whether to approve the proposal to close schools, as long as that decision is made after the study and the public hearing is held, the minimum of 1 public hearing. And you as a board can determine to the extent of that process that you would like to develop it yourself. So some additional steps just to follow, and I feel that I can't talk about just a closure process without putting there's a lot of disclaimers and a lot of things, because when you talk about a subject like this, it opens up the door for all kinds of questions, right? Because people start thinking about the programs in their schools. They start thinking about the timeline. They start thinking about what grade their children will be when this might occur. So there's all kinds of things you have to consider. But at the same time, if you close a school, there are other logistical things that come into play, such as the disposing or the repurposing of a property, of a building that is closed. So once a school board has made the decision regarding the proposed closure, the school board must also determine how to repurpose, sell, or otherwise dispose of a now empty facility when that time was to occur. The statute generally provides for school boards the authority to dispose of the property it owns, but there are the limitations that have to occur. First, the property may be used for other school system purposes at the board's discretion. So we could have a school that closes and you decide to repurpose it into another program possibly. You have that ability. But if you choose not to use it for school board interest or discretion, the board and you decide to possibly sell the real property down the road because it's no longer suitable for a public school purpose, you do have to provide the Board of County Commissioners the first opportunity to purchase the property, and that is part of the statute that is stated there. What I will say to you in this process, given the limited land availability within the Chapel Carborough City School District, whatever is decided, and I've said this, I believe, in some facility finance meetings, I would not recommend that we ever consider selling our property. We may demolish a building, we may repurpose a building, depending upon its condition, but we should always keep the land because we do not know what the future holds. And with the limited availability of land and the tightness of the sites of our properties, you've heard me talk about this through the Wolpert report, we should not consider, unless there is a land swap or something that can occur where we are to acquire land that would be serve a very advantageous purpose for our district. So I just put that out there, but there are statutory requirements for that. At the same time, if the Board of County Commissioners, if you were to offer them first right of refusal to purchase the property based upon the statute, if they chose not to, then obviously there are procedures outlined in Chapter 160A, Article 12, that talks about the advertisement for sealed bids, negotiating an offer through an upset bid or public advertisement, auction, exchange, or even private negotiation, just as you would with any type of real property that you would be disposing of. At the same time, there are cases where when schools close, the Board of Education may ultimately receive requests, or during this process, you may receive ideas that come from other groups to donate the property to community organizations. In the North Carolina Constitution, what the guidance here from Tharrington Smith says is that that is prohibited for boards of education from giving away real estate. The property must either be sold using one of the procedures that I just mentioned, with the proceeds remaining with the school system, or two, used in a way that continues to provide benefit to public schools. So just, again, knowing when you start talking about this, just like we talk about new construction, developers and people start getting ideas. So we just want to talk about that so that it's out there for folks to understand that there are limitations and requirements that you have. Lastly, the North Carolina Department of Instruction does have guidance that it provides to school districts. The document is from 2019. But it does kind of give some best practices and some recommendations for boards to consider. It's not a requirement other than what's in statute, but I wanted to walk through that, and this is just kind of a cover page of the document. But it has various categories that it says that boards may want to consider talking about if it's applicable. And that could be the evaluation of the facility, its capacity, its membership, the cost of operation, transportation, looking at demographics, be it diversity, alternative uses of the property, programs. It walks through the tentative decision that can occur, the informal meetings that you may want to choose beyond just a public hearing, and then it walks through the disposition of property. And last but not least, about how you need to inform North Carolina DPI if the school is taken offline from an accountability standpoint, the registration standpoint, there's coding and all kinds of stuff that goes along with it. So what I have here, just a final slide, obviously, is the next steps for you as a board for consideration. Is one, develop an initial proposal for closure. That would be asking staff to conduct some form of a study or bring information back for you to weigh. Ultimately, you have to determine a school. You have to officially conduct a study of a closure, determine a timeline for the closure and the process, provide school community informational meetings, provide the Board of Education public hearing that is required. You make a decision. And then ultimately back within the superintendent's staff is that we would need to contract with a demographer to begin the district-wide redistricting analysis process that ultimately would occur, because a lot of the decisions about, making a decision about closing a school is a very tough one, but where the community will really want to weigh in, because if you have buildings that are inefficient and the county is saying they can't afford to fund those, you got to make that decision. But it's really going to be when redistricting occurs and the community's involvement in weighing in of what they value, what they would want to be taken into consideration under the boundary changing process, especially given the fact that it would impact all 11, or at that time, if it's 10 or 9 of our schools, they would all be impacted by that. And that's where the public process would really come into play. So with that being said, I can answer any questions that you have at this point.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Shiroki. Board members, do you have any questions? Ronnie?
Thank you for the presentation. I think there is some alignment between the requirements in the law and our policy around making major decisions. So I think it just, as we go through the process, let's make sure we're being aware of kind of the steps that are included in that policy as well. I guess the next question then is, like, how do we practically get started? Like, I don't know if we're going to have some discussion about that or.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, we will. Why don't we have a few more questions and then we can talk about what we're thinking about next. George?
That was going to be mine. Risa was just, okay, so is it the question to you or to Mr. Shirogi or both? What next? How do we get started? And I don't mean literally tonight, what next, but where do we go?
Yeah, well, I think Mr. Shiroki, and he's got the slide up. I mean, this is a good, helpful slide to kind of guide us in terms of what we should consider doing next. And I guess, Mr. Shiroki, I just want to clarify the difference, like the nuanced difference between like 1 and 2, maybe? Because it's like develop the initial proposal for closure, but also I think we probably need to think about the schools because that may dictate the proposal itself.
So let me walk through, because that is a little nuance there.
Yeah.
So obviously, Wolpert recommended in its study that the county commissioner said, these schools that are your oldest, we don't want you to renovate, we want you to replace, they're educationally inadequate, all of that. They had determined that there were 6 elementary and 2 middle schools that should be taken into consideration if full funding was available. And of the 6 elementary, 3 we prioritized as a board had the greatest need at that moment, and that was the replacement of Carborough, Estes Hills, and Frank Porter Graham. There are 3 schools that are remaining at the elementary level, and those schools are Sewell, Glenwood, and Ephesus. Those cover all of the schools that are greater than 50 years of age, and they're about 54 to 68 years of age for those 3 schools that I just mentioned. Wolpert did recommend consideration of replacing 2 middle schools. So I want to be totally transparent. They talked about Culbreth and Phillips Middle, and we went through a lot of debate determining that ultimately in the next referendum we would prioritize, at least at this point, Phillips over Culbreth, if you remember those conversations. So I think that at least knowing that the Board of County Commissioners has said that in order to receive continued capital funding year to year, that we do have to follow the spirit of the Wolpert plan. We have to look at optimization. It's not just the age of your buildings, but it's looking at optimizing your facilities that are under capacity. I would think that looking at the 3 remaining oldest elementary schools would be a good starting point, at least to start, and for me to possibly come back with just information that I can share from what have we spent in those buildings, say for the past 5 years, what do we anticipate we may have to spend for the future 5 years, what are some of the ancillary information that we can provide to you just to look at those schools and to help guide. The reason I've put develop a proposal is I think we have to follow what the consultant for the county did. And by talking about 3 schools, I think you have to start with 3. But in the end, the consultant for capacity is not saying to close 3 schools. So when I put determine the schools, you have the ability potentially to determine what I would recommend is 2 schools or 1 school, but you definitely have the capacity to close 2 based upon the demographers, actually 2 demographers giving us that information. So I think that would be the starting point that I would recommend. And by no means I would come to you and recommend to close a school that is 30 years of age or 25 years of age. I mean, we need to look at the schools that we know we have deferred capital maintenance in that could be $5 to $15 million over the course of the next 5 to 8 years. And the reason I say that even more so now than I would have said last year is that with the passing of the bond, there was PAYGO money that was to be part of it that would go towards the maintenance in our existing buildings. Well, that PAYGO was not approved this past year. And, so for me, even more so, we have less maintenance dollars in the long term because 1 year out of, say, the 10 years that the PAYGO was supposed to be there was not approved. So that's less money to go into our remaining existing portfolio. So for me, more so than ever, trying to take the buildings that are the most inefficient from a cost standpoint, from a capital investment standpoint. That's where we've got to start. If money was flowing and there was plenty of money for maintenance, I think we would have some ability to look beyond that. But you know as well as I do that when we present you information on our maintenance, that we are not being proactive with maintenance. We are responding to crises after crises because the needs are far greater than the means. And it didn't take a consultant for the county to tell us that, but it just demonstrated and magnified the need. So I think we just can't look past that because we have to ensure that if we're replacing schools and trying to get our kids into the newest buildings, that we're still taking care of the existing portfolio for those schools that are not being replaced.
George?
I wanted to jump in here, and because like right now I'm already thinking 3 schools are going to hear in the morning we're targeted for closing, and I'm not trying to be funny at all. Yeah. We've been through this with in recent years, where what we think we're saying and what's heard are 2 different things. Could we consider some sort of put this in context of this is going to be a district-wide redistricting that involves putting replacement schools online and also closing underutilized elementary schools, and that it somehow impacts everybody, and really maybe name it something different, structure it different, and talk about it differently, so that we don't talk about let's close a school in isolation of this is really just a part of the bigger 5-year plan or 8-year plan or something. Mm-hmm. So I'm just kind of thinking out loud, but as he was presenting, I was just having flashbacks to our couple summers ago, and we were just trying to do our work in public, but people were hearing you're closing my school tomorrow, and that's not what was being said.
Right. No, that's a good point, George. Obviously, this is like a multiple issues and topics that we're having to grapple with, and so I agree for the school communities and the schools that Mr. Shiroki just mentioned. We're not closing the school tomorrow. Your kids can go to the school they've been going to all year, but I think we want to start the discussion. We want to be transparent. We want to get people on notice and say, okay, we're talking about building a new school. We're talking about our finances, as Mr. Scott talked about. We're talking about our declining enrollment, as Dr. Trice has been talking to community about. And the reality is we do have to make some adjustments with what our school portfolio looks like over the next, few years, at least the next decade or so. So I think that's really helpful. I know some of the statutory stuff, we will have to call some of the stuff school closure, but I agree with you, George, that this is part of a bigger strategic portion of our strategic plan that we have to think about. And I love how there's multiple points we have to consider. It's not just, we're just going to close the school. We've got to think about, we're going to be opening some new schools. We've got to be looking at our enrollment. We've got to be talking to our community. We've got to be working with Carolina demography to see what our trends are looking like to make this decision. So that's a good point. Any other thoughts or comments? Go ahead, Barb.
Well, I think it's important also to say that there's our own evaluation of this being a need, but there's also some external pressure to do this, or some encouragement at least from the county and the state too, right? That the state wants us to be responsible fiscal stewards. And so that, and then also you mentioned programs, but I guess I also feel like it's important to clarify that we're talking about buildings, and some of the buildings that you mentioned have programs that are probably also subject to some study and evaluation under the academic return on investment process, but that is separate from buildings.
That is correct. But when I reference programs, it could be that a school that, if we're looking at, say, 10 schools or 3 schools, we would want to talk about that if there are programs that are based where there are children that are coming from across the district, that there's not confusion that by closing the school, that means that program is going to immediately end. That, our idea would be, unless an exercise or a determination is made about a program, that if there's a school that has a program, that we would have to maintain that program at an alternate site. we would not just, that would not be the reason to stop a program. But I think that the community would immediately, that would be the, obviously staff are going to ask questions and parents are going to ask questions about the fate of their school, but also if they have a child that's attending a program on top of that. So we would just want to give that type of guidance so that everybody understands where we are and that there are no fast decisions or predeterminations that are being made.
Go ahead.
That raises a good angle that we should have mentioned as well, which is that it is on. That closing a school, the vast majority of your positions are allotted based on students. So it doesn't mean a loss of employees necessarily either. It would mean, most teachers, et cetera, go where the students are.
Right.
And I do think, any presentation that you ask for staff to conduct, we'll have to provide context and go back to the presentation that I provided back in August that just talks about the implications and how we got to where we are, but also just looking at the efficiencies and inefficiencies and what that is from a operational and financial standpoint. Because there'll be people who will be listening who were not involved or part of that conversation, even though we were, the public was not. So we'll continue to have to provide context with many of the presentations that we do. There'll be new people becoming involved in it each time.
Right.
And so that they're well informed and have all the information that has been provided.
Thank you. Board members, any other questions? Go ahead, Vicki.
I don't have a question per se, but just a few comments. As we're looking at the greater scheme of things that are going on in our community in terms of our population changing, where housing is, where people are living within a land-tight space, we have to think about the fact that for many, many years before we had a huge population boom, we operated with a much smaller district, even as people were being transient in this community. I mean, there were 6 elementary schools up until, 1996, give or take, and 2 junior highs. We had no middle schools, and 1 high school. So, and that was working. And then we had a lot of people came in, and then schools were built really fast. So, I mean, and kind of an oxymoron kind of thing is our schools were being built much faster. Our roads and safety issues in the larger community are 25 years behind. Mm-hmm. So we kind of had the cart in front of the horse, not intentionally, but that's just kind of what happened. We prepared for all the people to come in schools, but the infrastructure for the community at large wasn't really prepared. That's not this body's fault. That's just what happened in life, and life has been life. And so we really have to be prepared to do what happens inevitably, kind of go back full circle. We're going to have to be prepared to go to what this community is saying is going to have to be. Look at a more smaller community, because that's what's happening. More people are coming in, but people are leaving out and moving to different parts of our state and different parts of our community at large. And we have to look at where they are. I was just looking back at when all of the newer schools came, and it happened really, really fast. We're talking about it 96, 99, 03, 13, and 2008. That's really fast compared to decades and decades and decades of no schools whatsoever, building on a little bit, changing a little bit. So they tried to so we're just going to have to, and it's going to hurt some, but if you look at so when people are talking about my community school, my neighborhood school, we had neighborhoods in all of those spaces. The neighborhoods are in the same areas. They may have be some newer ones, but there's still space for room as we have schools that meet the needs of our kids. So there's not like we're talking about children are going to be bused 45 minutes to a school. We're talking about schools that literally might be 5 more minutes away from where you live. And we have to really be thoughtful and mindful that everybody doesn't have the ability to even look at it this way, because there are kids that live a little north of us in the same county that literally have to ride a bus 40 minutes to go to school. And we have to think about how privileged we are to not have to do that when we're thinking about maybe the ability that our child may not be able to walk out the door and go across the street and be at school, that they might have to get in a car and go down the street and around the corner and still be at school in all of 10 minutes. It's just, we're going to have to think about it for the greater good of the community.
Thank you, Vicki. Any other comments or thoughts? All right. So there isn't really a vote or action, but I think we can, make a request of the staff. Is that correct?
So I think what is needed is two things. First of all, do you want them to, because essentially we're beginning the study process.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want them to begin the study of all? Do you want them to begin the study process? Do you want them to do it of all three of those schools, or are you prepared to narrow that down any further today? And if you want them to start the process and you want them to study all three or however many, so that's sort of the decision. And then I think the qualitative information they need is what, to the extent you know, what information would you want included to help you narrow it down to one?
Go ahead, Meredith.
I was just going to say, if we're going to have some of that discussion tonight, that's fine with me. I would say that it would be good to look at all three schools and not go ahead and reduce it, because I think there's a lot of different factors that we need to look at. And I think one thing that we need to consider are how many kids are going to that school as a community school. Let's limit the number of kids who used to be able to walk across the street and then have to get on a bus or whatever. Obviously, that's not going to be able to be completely eradicated, but at least let's look at that as a factor. I know that two of those three schools at least have a significant population that are coming from all parts of the town. So that, I think that's something that we need to look at, and whether those programs could be located in other schools.
Thank you, Meredith. I know there was a lot of work done around these schools with the Wolpert study and the stuff that we did with the county commissioners, Al, and it might be helpful to maybe bring that stuff forward. As you said, there may have been community members who may not have been paying attention to or considering those three schools when we were talking about the Wolpert and all that study. It might be helpful to bring back information on all three schools, especially since a lot of that work has already been done. And also, I think what Ronnie said about balancing like policy and county and the state. The county also has given us a directive when it comes to the facilities that their focus is following the Wolpert plan. And so I think we want to make sure we stay. We're balancing a lot of parties here. So maybe just bringing back forward additional information on all three schools, especially the information from the Wolpert plan, and just, I guess, any other helpful information. Go ahead, Ronnie.
Yeah, I'd actually be interested in expanding the scope to 5 schools, including the other 2 FPG and Ephesus.
You mean FPG and Estes?
Yes.
Okay.
Wait, no, yes.
Because Glenwood School and
yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
I agree with that. As the new board member, I was kind of wondering, why aren't we looking at more? It just seems to me that if we are really looking big picture, we should be looking at more.
And it'll give us a clearer look as we apply the filters that we define about how we make the decision. And so I think Meredith hit on one that's probably going to be the most important of, like, what are the community populations, like how many people can walk to school, and what does transportation look like, and what are alternate redistricting if we think about each school as options.
So if I could just get some clarification about FPG and Estes Hills, knowing that we have approved and in
We're
the bond.
10 years away from a plan for them. So I'm I'd love to re-engage and say, are those the places that we would make choices if we knew that we were going to close the school?
Well, what I will say is FPG and Estes Hills and Carborough had greater need than the three schools that I discussed tonight. So I could tell you right now, Carborough, Estes Hills, and FPG have tremendous facility needs. FPG is a program, so basically, other than the English-speaking students come from all over, we know that, right? So, I mean, I would be repeating that, but I think we would just need to be I would need direction on if we're just wiping the slate clean as an exercise and we're talking about it, or are we talking about potentially not beginning the design towards a replacement, say Estes Hills next year as planned? You know, are we like starting over, or is it just you need information to compare?
Yeah, I think it's information that would allow us to filter. Like, there may be some easy answers. So, for example, I think about Sewell, right? It's right there with all the other schools. A lot of kids walk to school. That might be one that we say, that one we might not want to consider just because of the not the demographics, but the population around the school, right? So just, to me, having the broader scope of consideration that we run through the same filters, we could arrive at the same conclusion, but I'd love us to be able to just have those conversations.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is, once I do the analysis, we could talk about how those schools are scheduled to be replaced, but let's look at adjacencies to other schools. Let's look at walkability. Let's look at access. The same information that I suggested.
Think about FPG.
Just to show that.
Yeah, the highway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Understood now. Thank you.
Go ahead, Barb.
I guess that gives me some pause because I think that's going to be very confusing to people. We just said we're going to replace those schools. So it feels like it's going to be it's already hard to message this, that we passed a bond, we're going to build new schools, we're going to close some schools, and now we're going to talk about closing the schools we just said we would replace. I think that's going to get really, really muddled. And so I would not be in favor of that.
Yeah, I could see that, but we have new information, right? If we had the information we had 3 years ago when we started looking at Wolford, we probably would have had we might have had different decisions. So I think it's like appropriate for us to look at it all again. And again, we could end up in the same place, but
What I would say, and it's the reason I asked the question for clarity, is I think for people who are just tuning in, I think that it could create some confusion, but I mean, obviously you guys could decide if you wish to move forward or not, but I would try to present it to where it's informational, and it's not that I would not give opinions about it, whereas I would for the schools that are not scheduled to be replaced, because those are ones where there's real decisions, so that you as a board would have to make a determination if you wanted to re-pursue the other two. But I get from an informational standpoint to show, because you're going to see that when it comes to all the other ancillary comparisons, those schools have things that are similar and in common to the schools that I've mentioned. And you'll see that there's parity and there's similarities. It's just the conditions is where it's ranked pretty straightforward. But yeah, so I'll let you as a board decide how you'd want me to proceed with that.
George, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to echo what Barb said, and I think I saw some heads nodding. I really think that we need to keep this separate from any of the schools that were in the bond discussion. We spent several years working to get the clarity on all this. And if there's any hint that we're now back in the mix for doing something different to them, I think it's the potential's there to very much confuse the public, not to mention the board, in terms of, we've decided to replace those schools. And so we need to know that so we can work around what schools to close. Because this is in a bigger context of, it affects all 11 sites in the district with the class assignments, program development, staff hiring. I mean, I don't understand what we would gain by adding in FPG and or Sewell or Estes Hills, any of the schools. Yeah, sorry, I
mean-
shouldn't have said so.
I don't know if
Oh.
this helps, if this adds to it, but when we went through those exercises and looking at alternate sites and all of that, we looked at distances, adjacencies, walkability, programs. We differentiated that, FPG really is not part of a redistricting process because it is a 100% program, but Glenwood is not. There are zone students that attend that school, so it's almost a hybrid. Carborough is a hybrid, if you want to call it that, whereas FPG is not. So we went through a lot of that. So the information is there, but I think there is a balance between what we committed to the citizens and the messaging and just possibly presenting it, but in a way in which it's just ancillary, but it's not primary, when you're looking at the comparison. But again, I could argue either way and say that in some respects you may not even want to discuss it at all and put it other than reminding people that there is a commitment to move this so that doesn't create additional questions. But the messaging that was discussed, that is real, that people will hear one thing tonight and interpret it a different way, and we just want to keep that balanced in order for you to be able to make the best decision possible.
Any other thoughts or comments? My thinking is to keep it focused. I agree with Barb and George. I think we've already committed to the construction. We need to think about some school closure. Some of the timelines might run in parallel for all the activities to happen, and it might be helpful for decision making. Building a new school, I think we're going to yield a few more seats in them, which
That's our intent.
yeah, and so I
That's the
think
lens.
that's going to be something that's layered into the discussion, and I fear if we reopen the discussion of which elementary schools, it's just going to get quite cloudy for the community. We've already been there, done that, identified the 3 schools for construction. Hopefully we can get 2 strong ones and maybe the 3rd one. So I'm leaning towards just asking the staff to come back with just the more information on the 3 schools, the 3 remaining schools that were not part of the bond, and also they were not considered, I guess, part of the newer schools. So that'd be Glenwood, Sewell, and Ephesus. I don't know. Go ahead, Mary.
Also, aren't we kind of locked into that anyway with an agreement with the Board of County Commissioners? I think it would not only confuse the public, but it would also confuse things between the various boards. I don't know.
Yeah, because I think we had to vote and go ahead. Oh, yeah.
Well, what I was going to say is, usually with bonds, what the county did is that they would say that there are high priority projects, replacement schools to occur. But when we were working in the early stages with our bond education committee and getting out, it was very evident that our citizens, in order for them to be behind, be informed, and to determine what their vote would be, we had to run with, let's let them know what you as a board, your intent is. And we went out there and we pretty much, we did tell the citizens that this is our intent, this is the order, this is why, and that if there's ever additional funding, these are the remaining schools that the consultant recommends that you replace or renovate. And if you remember, when the consultant put renovate and the commissioners looked at that and said, we don't want to spend $30 million renovating an elementary school when you could spend $42 million and replace it and have children in a state-of-art facility that has to last for another 50 years. Mm-hmm. So it just changed. The Wolpert plan, if you looked at it today and you looked at where it has, what it is today versus what was printed, it has morphed over and changed with the decisions that the county has made. But we did make a commitment and go out there because our citizens asked that of us, more so than I think the Orange County citizens who voted for Orange County schools. They weren't demanding that at that level, but our citizens were. I was up here working with an engineer and an architect and showing scenarios and site fittings analysis to demonstrate that you could build a school on the site if push came to shove, and because the community was asking for that before they could make a decision. They wanted to have sound decision making behind where their increase in taxes was going to go. It's what they communicated to us.
Go ahead, Ronnie.
I just want to push a little bit on what I've been hearing of like the idea of confusion. Like, I think if we are undertaking a study to assess closing schools, it is our responsibility to consider the full scope of things. Again, when we did the Wilford study, had we known that we were going to consider closing schools, I wonder if Wilford might have come back with different recommendations. And so it feels like the responsible thing. And even if we end up in the same place, and even if we decide that we want to exclude those as considerations, that we look at them and say, like, would we make a different decision? We're making a huge decision to close a school or two. And I just don't want us to exclude things because we're uncomfortable about having conversations with community members that I'm pretty sure they can understand.
Go ahead, Barb.
I guess we could. How hard would it be to have like an appendix with all 11 schools, like in order? Yes, no, like here's why we would consider this, here's why we wouldn't, like just sort of ranking them. And it seems kind of silly, like you're obviously not going to close a brand new school, but maybe just that might give you maximum transparency with the public. I don't know how much work that would be, but just if we pick the factors, it doesn't seem like it would be that hard to just be like in this order. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, clearly you would not replace a school that is on average less than 50 years of age. You would not consider that. The report's not going to provide you with that level of granular detail. What I would do is I would show, here are the 11 elementary schools. The report identified out of the 11 said there were 6 that needed to be, because they talked about consolidation in the Wilbert report. So it's either consolidate, replace, or renovate. And we could narrow that down to where we're not talking about 11, we're talking about 6. Out of the 6, 3 have already been approved to be used with bond dollars, with funding allows, and then that allows 3 remaining to consider. So it just kind of narrows it down. Conducting a full analysis on all 11, I will say the time, the energy, it could be done, but I don't know if you really need to go there. But I get the fact of showing a list and showing the age with all 11 schools. But the cautious thing I will say is, and we learned, that facility condition index rating number is not the turnkey solution, and the age of the building is a predominant one. But I will tell you that we have, out of those 3 schools, one of the youngest of the 3 has the greatest need. It's not just the age, it's the condition and what that specific building. So it's really easy to say you're just going to go from your oldest to your newest, and that's the path you're going to take. But it's not as easy as that when you look at the cost. But I think we could show it at least, and be able to show the age so people see. Because one thing we learned in the bond referendum is that there were citizens, though they may be 5 minutes from another school, they had never been to that school. They really didn't even know it was there in some cases. So they may not know that Northside was built, in 2013 or whatever the year that it was done. They may not know that. They may think that the school was built in 1958. So at least having that so people see, oh, okay, everything is basically 1958 to about 1972 when it comes to the year that it was built on the list. So I think we could.
Vicki, that's you.
Yeah. Well, I would definitely say that to speak to what Ronnie was saying, that it also may be that we need to help people understand that we may be talking about buildings and not necessarily schools. I know we're looking at schools that some will have to be closed, the buildings. And I know just from us seeing some wonderful new schools and presentations here recently at the conference when we were in Greensboro, where we were able to see schools or a school that was able to take numbers and thinking differently about stuff and just make a beautiful space where more kids could come in and be educated into a space that's just state of the art. And that may just be by seeing all the different things that may happen or could happen, let's say it this way, and maybe shift the thinking from what we're going to have to do to what we may be able to do and may be fortunate to do in terms of possibly taking certain buildings offline, but not necessarily looking at it necessarily meaning that schools per se are going to be closed. Our schools are going to be wherever we send our students. I mean, even if we were to, take University Place and just make it a huge location, it just is what it is. So and that doesn't necessarily mean that said school will be closed. I just want our community to realize that no one is trying to take from them. If a school which is where our kids will be educated has to be put in a different geographic region, that's just the building. The school are the living, breathing educators and children that go in the space. That's the school, and that's going to be the life of the school. But we're really going to have to step back from the emotional attachment to the building. Glenwood Elementary School was built in 1953. That building has seen its days. Whether we want to close it or not, that's 1953. It is just not made to educate our children in 2026. And we have to do due diligence to think about what the children in 2026 needs are, and not what the parents, us, are thinking about how we were educated in some of the buildings. I mean, I have some wonderful memories in a lot of the schools that were here, but I also understand that they may not be adequate for what our children need now. We just have to really think about it that way, and so we can do the best we can do. So I think us being able to stop for a moment, take pause, and look at all the different opportunities doesn't mean that, we may possibly have to close this school that was just built 25 years ago. No, of course not. We know that we have some wonderful schools, but we're really going to have to take the time to look to see what's going on, where and how, so that they know that we took every opportunity to pay attention. And not saying that means we want to kick the can down the road either. No, we will do our due diligence and pay attention to what the bond said and what we said we will do with our community, because that's our responsibility. So I'm not saying that at all. I just think it's given a good chance to look at big pictures, which we don't always have the opportunity to do. And I think this is just one of those situations where we can look at things in a different way and see what different things would be, what the different programs might look like in a different space, and what this school might look like if it's in a different space, and not just to consider, oh my God, it's just going to be schools that are going to be closed, and what will our children do? They're going to be in a new building, which is their school at some point, and still be educated to the best of our abilities.
Dr. Trice.
So I guess from an administration standpoint, what I'm hearing is at the base, we will focus on the 6 elementary schools that were identified in the Wolpert report. One is already, we're pretty much down that line. And essentially what we're bringing to the board is a proposal from the administration, what our recommendation would be concerning, the 5 elementary schools. We would then share that with the board for you all to make a determination in guiding us forward for purposes of a study.
Yeah.
So I think we have the information that we need to, start the proposal process, knowing that we have, the guidance of the report, and we'll be able to make a recommendation to the board on how we would, move forward. Of course, you all would have, leeway to kind of give us other guidance, but, I think that's kind of what I'm hearing right now.
George.
No, I wasn't hearing that. I was hearing some people, some board members feel like 5, but I really strongly just want to reiterate, I think we should focus on the 3 older schools. I mean, Wolpert recommended consolidation or closure of elementary school. We've had this discussion at length 3 years ago and 2 years ago when we selected our schools for the bond issue. And we knew then that we would eventually have to look at closing a school if we followed the Wolpert report. So this isn't new in the last year or two because of budget reasons or anything. And so I would ask the chair to, if we're making some big decision like that, take a temperature vote here of the board or something, because I think we're headed down a real confused road to add schools to this discussion that are already in the bond plan. We're already down the road on that. We are closing the buildings. We're building them a brand new building. And it's open to every student in the district potentially as we put programs in place and redistrict student assignment. So, keep the big picture in focus here of this affects all 11 schools. It's not just we're closing a building.
All right. So thank you, George. I think that's a good point. Yeah, I know you said 5. I wasn't necessarily hearing 5. So let me just see how many board members think 3 or 5 or whatever number. Meredith, how many schools I think were you thinking about? Or I can start at either end, whoever. I can start with Melinda. How about that? We always start on the left.
And again, I still think we should look at all 5 because and again, I'm new. A lot of things I missed, but it seems to me that we do have additional information that maybe we didn't have 2 years ago. And to me, I just think we just need to show the public that we're being very thorough, that we're willing to kind of look at all the factors. And I think we can explain it by saying, hey, we're making sure we're making the absolute best decision on this. And so we need to look at all 5.
George is 3. Barb.
3.
Barb is 3. Vicky.
5.
Vicky's 5. Ronnie.
6.
Ronnie is 6.
I'm being sort of facetious, but I think just the easiest approach feels to be to Melinda's point of put it all in scope. We obviously aren't going to decide to make changes. We're far down the path with Carborough.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably true for some other schools. But for a decision this big, I think we would be remiss not to fully consider everything.
Meredith.
I'm not opposed to getting the information, but I think we put this on a ballot and we were very clear about what schools were going to be rebuilt. And so, I hear your point. I'm not denying that you have a point. I think you definitely do. But I think at this point, once we've had the voters vote on the bond and that they were attached to projects, that we need to focus on the 3 remaining schools that have the highest level of need.
So that sounds like 3. No worries. I was going to say 3 anyway, so that was kind of directionally. Not necessarily taking a vote, but the pulse check. So I think 3, but I would say to other board members, if we listen to the 3 and people feel like they need more information to the other board members, I would hope that we are open if we need to hear about other schools, that we can say that after we hear about these 3 schools, that if we still feel like we need more information to consider, we can go back, because we aren't yet at the determining a school and starting a study. We're still at the getting information phase, that initial proposal phase, Dr. Trice. So let's start with 3. Let's look at that information and we'll go from there, board members. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.